The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents all atheist arguments answered in 10 minutes. Answered. Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. I don't normally do any videos like this, and all the time I've been posting videos, it's, hey, whatever's on my mind or whatever questions people have asked. I don't really do response videos. I don't tend to watch other atheist content to see what they're doing. I don't go chasing the algorithm. I have no idea who this person is who posted this. I have no idea who's done responses to it or what those responses are. I've only clicked play just long enough to make sure that the audio was working. And so, yeah, a friend suggested I do this. Let me know if you like it, if you want to see more of this. I know they're popular. It's just never really the kind of thing that I've actually tried to do. But here we go. Without having watched any of it, let's dig in.
Atheists have a lot of arguments, but they never really think of anything new that the church hasn't had answers to for the past 2,000 years.
Atheists have a lot of arguments, but nothing new. There's an argument wheel here that says, I believe in science, so that means God can't be real. That's not okay. I think what this is going to be is perhaps complaints about some things that atheists say that are a bit confusing. But when it comes to atheism, the state of not being convinced that a God exists, first of all, the burden of proof is on the people claiming that a God exists, so you don't need any arguments all against theism. But it's worth noting that there are, in fact, arguments against theism, things like the argument from divine hiddenness or silence, the argument from inconsistent revelation, things like that. I think I don't know if we'll see any of those, but what I see here on the wheel is, if God's real, why don't I have a girlfriend yet? I don't need a God to know murder is bad. Don't ask about abortion, though. Your God did a genocide in the flood. He's a big meanie. I believe in science, so that means God can't be real. I was raised Christian and I have trauma. They said not to sin. Look, here's a violent Bible verse that nobody ever noticed before. There's contradictions in the Bible the church has never noticed, and Sky Daddy. Are we sure that this is actually like coming from a theist and not just some weird parody account? I don't know, but let's go.
So let's answer them. Religion causes wars. Well, actually, only 7% of all human wars were caused by religion, and if you remove Islamic wars, that number drops down to 3%. A lot of...
Okay. That's not an argument for atheism. It's certainly an argument against adhering to some religions, but and if anybody's suggesting that every war ever was started by religion, that's silly. But no matter how low the percentage is, and I'm not going to go look up the statistics because it's a bad argument either way, secularism, secular humanism, I'm not aware of any war that secular humanism's ever started.
Of evil has been done in the name of religion. This is true, but the most murderous people in human history have been atheists.
Okay, so how is that not just a Tukul-K fallacy of, oh yeah, well, you do it too? The issue here, first of all, whether or not people do evil in the name of religion is irrelevant to whether or not the religion is true. You could have an evil God or whatever.
This doesn't mean religion is true, it just means you can't use that as an argument against it. If you were born somewhere else, you wouldn't be a Christian. Okay, and if you were born somewhere else, you wouldn't be an atheist. Everyone's beliefs are shaped...
So this is a bad response, but yeah, the claim, if you lived somewhere else, you wouldn't be a Christian, is not an argument that the religion isn't true. It's just a true statement that one of the most common indicators of what religion someone believes is the religion that they're surrounded with. That's irrelevant to whether or not the religion's true. But also, if you live somewhere else, you wouldn't be an atheist. That may be true. You know, if I live somewhere that makes atheism illegal, I wouldn't have had the wherewithal to question religion. So yeah, if I lived in some Islamic regime, I'd likely be a Muslim as well.
By their context. How do you know which religion is true?
That's a question. That's not an argument. If this is a weird take on the argument from inconsistent revelation, I could see that.
Well, everyone, religious or not, has faith in a certain worldview. It's just that some worldviews are called religions and some are secular. But everyone has to ask the question of which worldview best explains the world.
Yeah, So I use faith in a different way. Faith is the excuse people give for believing when they don't have a good reason. Because if you have a good reason and somebody says, why do you believe this? You give the good reason. You don't make an appeal to faith. So this notion that everybody has to have some faith and you've just opted for religion and we've opted for faith and science. Yeah, that's not an argument against the truth of your religion at all. That, once again, this is, hey, I heard some atheists say this and I thought they were trying to disprove religion or God. And so now I'm just going to toss it out as it doesn't do it. No, it doesn't disprove religion or God. It's not even an attempt to do so. But and here we go again. There's no scientific proof that God exists.
There's no scientific proof that God exists. Well, by definition, science can only prove things inside the natural world, and by definition, God is something outside the natural world. So science can neither prove nor disprove God. There's no evidence.
Science can neither prove nor disprove God. Cool. Now show me what utility could prove God. What method or mechanism are you using to explore this non-natural entity that you've concluded exists, which means you must have a method. You must have some way of doing it. Show me that method, demonstrate its reliability. That's important. But to say science can't prove God, therefore God doesn't exist, that's not a sound argument.
Of anything supernatural. Well, that's just not accurate. There are medically documented cases of people with demonic possession speaking in languages they don't know, for example, and people with near-death experiences getting information they never had access to.
So, if somebody says there's no evidence of anything supernatural, and remember, with arguments like this, we're dealing with colloquialisms, and so somebody's saying, oh, there's no reason to believe anything supernatural. And he's like, oh, look up demonic possessions and near-death experiences. Neither of those confirm anything supernatural. The fact that someone claims they have an experience, or if something happens that we don't understand, if somebody's speaking in a language that they say they don't know, and we don't have any way to confirm it, that doesn't mean the cause is supernatural. We are limited in confirming causation at a naturalistic level. There is no method that anybody's ever come up with that I'm aware of, or that this person has demonstrated, which allows someone to investigate the supernatural or confirm the supernatural. So there's a difference between someone saying the cause of this is supernatural and someone confirming that the cause of that is supernatural. But he's at least right that if you say there's no evidence of anything supernatural, that is not necessarily confirmation of God or that there isn't God. But what it is saying is, hey, you guys still haven't proven God or anything else supernatural, which is correct.
The Bible has contradictions.
Ah.
Okay, you think you found an apparent contradiction that the church hasn't known about for 2,000 years? Every apparent contradiction can be explained by understanding just a little bit of theology.
Okay. And if you understand a little bit more theology, you'll see beyond that as well. The fact that there are contradictions in the Bible, though, doesn't prove that there isn't a God. It's not an argument for atheism. It is an argument against the reliability of Scripture, and that argument stands because there are, in fact, contradictions. And the fact that apologists and theologians have come up with ways to massage and reconcile them, their reconciliations appeal to things that either aren't in the text. They're either reading into the text or trying to justify something in one book by something in another book. At the end of the day, it's completely unsurprising that even if there were a God, it's completely unsurprising that there might be errors in a book that is purported to be inspired by that God, because humans are fallible creatures. That would be the better apologetic, is to say that, okay, there's errors in the Bible. That doesn't mean there's not a God, because that would be true.
The Gospels were anonymous.
They are.
Okay, well, anonymous doesn't mean we have no idea who wrote them. It just means the names of the authors aren't signed in the text itself. But we literally have writings from church fathers who knew the apostles and can verify that they indeed wrote the books named after them.
That's simply not true. First of all, none of this is an argument against the existence of God. So once again, if some atheist is presenting this as an argument against the existence of God, that just doesn't work. But the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, those names were attributed as a matter of church tradition, and St. Ignatius of Antioch can't confirm that John wrote John any more than he could show up today and say, yep, that's the same exact version of the book that I had back then. Just own it. Literally, you can pick up your Bible and it will say these are unsigned. The names attributed to them are matters of church tradition. Is there a John who wrote the gospel according to John? Perhaps. Is it the John that some people think it is? Perhaps. The point is, we don't have any way to confirm that. And this seems to be something that if you're going to lean on, this is eyewitness testimony, which is already a problem and not reliable, then you would actually want some sort of confirmation of who wrote it. And it would be trivial for a God who inspired the books, supposedly, to preserve their authorship. And that didn't happen. And that's a problem.
The Gospels misquote Jesus. Now, it's true that a lot of secular scholars think the Gospels are a mix of real quotes from the historical Jesus and fake quotes added by the church, but none of them can agree on which quotes are legit and which are not, so we can discard their opinions. Jesus never claimed...
Okay, so this is argumentum ad urmen. Misquoting Jesus is a problematic thing because we can't confirm anything about Jesus outside of the Bible. We can't even confirm that he existed. I'm not arguing for mythicism. I'm not a mythicist, but that's a problem, that we can't attest to the reliability of these things. It's not an argument against God, though.
Claimed to be God. Yes, he did. He didn't say, "I am God, worship me," but he showed that he was God in many places in all four Gospels by doing things that only God can do. It's true that he didn't walk around before his resurrection claiming to be God, because he wanted people to figure it out themselves. That's why he kept saying, "Who do you say that I am?" However, after his resurrection, people figured out that he was God, and Jesus congratulated them.
So, yeah, this is a bad argument just across the board, because first of all, whether or not Jesus claimed to be God is completely separate from whether or not he was God or whether there is a God. So it's not an argument against a God. And I've had arguments with other atheists about this. They're like, Jesus never claimed to be God. And I'm like, yeah, he pretty much did. Before Abraham was, I am. What was he killed for? Essentially doing the things or supposedly doing the things that would be reserved for God. This is the foundation of the blasphemy here. So yeah, if you're an atheist and you're saying Jesus never claimed to be God, okay, you're technically right, which I guess is the best kind of right, but that's neither an argument against God, nor is it a demonstration that Jesus wasn't divine. But once again, it's up to the theist to demonstrate that Jesus was divine or that any of these things happened, and they can't.
One of the Gospels was written, the more divine it makes Jesus seem, so we can extrapolate that Jesus was originally a human figure who got made more divine over time. Alright, maybe some Gospels emphasize Jesus' divinity more than others, but what about Paul's letters that fully confess the divinity of Jesus and were also written before any of the Gospels? So that breaks your pattern.
Yeah, I've never heard this argument. It's not an argument against God. So it's not an argument for atheism. It's an argument for Jesus wasn't likely to be divine. But I don't know how you demonstrate that anybody is or isn't divine, just like I don't know how you demonstrate that something is or isn't caused supernaturally. They have no mechanism for this. So at the end, all we're going to do is talk about what does my preferred copy or my preferred understanding of my preferred copy of my preferred book say. And so if you look at the Gospels, and as they get later, they seem to make Jesus perhaps more divine, pointing to Paul seems reasonable, but this isn't an argument against Christianity at all.
The Bible supports slavery.
It does.
No, it doesn't. Just because there's
does.
slavery in the Bible doesn't mean the Bible supports it.
The Bible not only supports it, it specifically codifies it, tells you who to enslave, how to enslave them, how to trick them to become your slaves forever, how much to charge for them, who gets to go free, has different rules for Hebrew slaves than for non-Hebrew slaves, tells you to buy your slaves from the heathen that surround you, that they will be your property to be passed on to your children forever. Whether it doesn't have to say slavery is morally permissible, to say, hey, if it says you can't eat shellfish and that you shouldn't wear mixed fabrics, the Bible could have easily said, thou shalt not own another human being as property. And it says the opposite, literally, that they are your money. They are your property. So I don't know what he's going to say, but the Bible absolutely supports slavery.
There are some Old Testament verses that could be interpreted as condoning slavery.
Old Testament verses, first of all, are you getting ready to dismiss the Old Testament? Because that dismisses original sin and the Ten Commandments as well. But they don't have to be interpreted to endorse slavery. They explicitly do. And I have a whole video on my channel about the Bible and slavery.
But Jesus himself said that the Old Testament made accommodations to people's sinful state. And also, slave owning.
That passage there has nothing to do with slavery, and neither does any passage that any apologist has ever pulled from the New Testament to try to argue that the Bible or Jesus opposes slavery. Specifically, the New Testament says that slaves should obey their masters, even the cruel ones. That's the closest it comes. It does not say slavery is immoral. It does have passages against man stealing, but that still suggests the possibility of ownership. At no point does the Bible come out and condemn slavery. And this passage from Jesus doesn't even mention it.
Owners in the American South had slave Bibles for their slaves to read, but it omitted a lot of the real Bible.
Whether or not there was a slave Bible that omitted some of the real Bible is irrelevant to whether or not the Bible absolutely supports slavery.
So if the Bible actually did support slavery, this wouldn't have been necessary.
No, sir, that's just a flat lie. There are passages that can be interpreted in such a way that it could have been useful. But there is no condemnation of slavery in the Bible. You are just mistaken. And you can check my video where I go through all the things that are said in both Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy in support of slavery. And it seems strange to me that on this particular issue, I've watched 4 Christians standing within 2 feet of me in a semicircle arguing about whether or not the Bible actually supports slavery and what their apologetic should be. And as I was standing there, I said, when the 4 of you sort out what your actual apologetic is, then, elect whoever wants to come back and you can debate me on it. But as long as you guys can't agree on it, I don't have any more work to do. I'll just go with what the Bible says.
Christianity supported slavery.
It did.
Well, sure, some Christians did, but all human civilizations have had slavery. Christian civilization was the first one to abolish it on moral grounds. The fact that you're against slavery is due to Christian influence. Also,
it's true. Some Christians supported slavery. The Bible supports slavery. Some Christians oppose slavery. Christianity isn't some homogenous set of beliefs. There's a reason there are over 1,000 denominations that agree and disagree on almost every single point of doctrine. The fact that they can't get their shit together is maybe an argument similar to the one of inconsistent revelation, in the sense that there is no unified Christianity. This is a no true Scotsman fallacy to suggest that, those aren't the real Christians, these are the real ones. All of this is irrelevant to whether or not there is a God or whether or not Jesus is divine. This is an argument, once again, against what Christians have done.
Also, most organizations fighting modern-day slavery are Christian. God killed tons of people in the Bible.
Yep.
Well, it's actually way more than that. God numbers everyone's days. He's the giver of life, so he can take it.
Yeah. And some of those days he numbered as 1 when he supposedly drowned the entire world.
Especially if people sin. Atheist countries are more prosperous.
Really? That's the whole of your thing? I get it. God's supreme. He can do what he wants. There's nothing you can say about it. Congrats. But that's also not an argument that God doesn't exist. It just might be an argument that God is grossly immoral, or that God is amoral or a slaughterer. At the end of the day, though, if God's going to run around indiscriminately killing people from our perspective, it's fair to say God killed people. It's fair to say God killed more people than Satan did.
Yes, it's true that Northern European countries are very prosperous and...
So atheist countries are more prosperous. This isn't an argument for atheism, as atheism being true.
Very secular, but correlation doesn't equal causation. It's not like atheism causes prosperity. It's that prosperity causes atheism, because when people have comfortable lives, they don't feel a need to depend on God.
Well, that's an interesting take. I would agree correlation doesn't equal causation, and I would agree that those countries aren't necessarily prosperous because they're atheistic, but I also don't necessarily agree with his assertion that prosperity leads to atheism. It may not, but in some aspect, that's basically suggesting that poverty leads to theism, which may not have anything to do with whether or not the theistic claims are true, but about how exploitative religions are, where they want to get the people, the children, and indoctrinate them, where they want to get people at their weakest state and offer them some hope that they can't actually demonstrate. It's more about the exploitative nature of theism than it is prosperity leading to atheism.
But why are these particular countries so prosperous in the first place? They may be secular now, but they're rooted in generations and generations of Protestant Christianity. If you want an example of a...
So basically, are you suggesting that God blessed all those countries and then they said, go away, God, we don't need you now, we're going to stay prosperous?
Country that's atheist and not rooted in Christianity, look at communist China. There's 4,000 gods that people believe in, and you're atheist to 3,999 of them. I just go one god.
So this also isn't an argument that God isn't real. It's not an argument for atheism. It is just pointing out the reality that you dismiss other gods, and I dismiss yours as well. Not really an argument for atheism.
Further. Okay, this isn't the gotcha that you think it is, because the question of whether some sort of God exists is fundamentally different from the question of which religion is right about God. If God created everything, then who?
Correct, but that's not a response to the point. The point is, what makes your God distinct and different so that it shouldn't be dismissed in the same way we dismissed those other 3,999 gods? So if you're going to claim that you answered all the atheist arguments, but all you mean is that you threw up a response that didn't actually address the point at all, that's going to be pretty weak sauce. If God made everything, who or what created God? Okay, this one would have made sense perhaps once upon a time, but theologians have long held that God is uncreated, so you're asking who created the uncreated thing. This is the reason why they have first cause arguments. This isn't an argument against God or God's existence at all. It's a question that atheists are asking, which you can just say, okay, nothing made God. What's your justification for nothing made God? And how is your justification for nothing made God better for a God than it is for some version of the universe or something else that you don't understand that isn't a thinking creative agent existing?
Who created God? Well, God is defined as the uncaused causer. Everyone knows there needs to be a first cause at the beginning of the chain of all events.
It's not true that God is defined as the uncaused causer, because if it turns out there is an uncaused causer and that isn't a thinking agent that this person is advocating as God, then whatever God they have isn't, in fact, the uncaused causer. Even if you could demonstrate that there is an uncaused cause at the beginning of everything, that doesn't demonstrate that that cause is Yahweh, Allah, or any other God in particular, which is what this person's actually advocating for as an advocate of Jesus.
In the universe, and it makes a lot more sense for that first cause to be a personal God who caused things for a reason, rather than some.
To say it makes more sense for it to be a personal God for that started something for a reason rather than
random impersonal force.
No, it's more appealing to you because you want there to be a God. You have no way to demonstrate that a God is more plausible than a random impersonal force, because you don't have any ability to investigate the origin of everything. And as soon as you pretend that yours is more reasonable because you find it more preferable, you've lost. Because I don't find it more preferable. I think it's less preferable that there's a notion. I think it's more preferable that there's a random impersonal force or some non-personal agent cause as a potential uncaused cause than there is that there's some being out there that has created everything with a purpose and then hides and doesn't interact and makes me listen to people like you instead of just demonstrating the evidence for its own existence.
Science disproves God.
No, it doesn't. If you're an atheist and you're running around saying science disproves God, you need to do a little bit more work in clarifying what it is that you're saying, because science addresses models and doesn't disprove anything. We develop theories and models that are the tentative and most robust demonstrations of our understanding of reality. Science doesn't disprove God. What science may in fact demonstrate is not true are certain claims that some people have tied to their gods, which doesn't prove that there's not a God somewhere else. This isn't an argument for atheism at all, as is the case with virtually everything. As a matter of fact, I don't know that I've heard a single argument for atheism yet. We're now at the halfway mark, I guess, and all we've heard are, caricatures of things that some people say about why they're not a Christian or why they're not religious. No arguments for atheism yet.
Well, actually, the church invented modern science. All the founders of the scientific revolution deeply believed in God.
Wow. Okay. First of all, I already said what I needed to say about science disproving God, but how science began is irrelevant. Unless God began science and you can demonstrate it, the fact that people who believed God when 90% of the world believed in some sort of God happen to also talk about and work on creating science is irrelevant. The thing is, amongst the scientific elite now, not as many as used to believe in a personal God. And science does not only not disprove God, it doesn't confirm God. So you're bringing up a completely irrelevant point to suggest that the church created science. No, reasonable people who cared about the truth and happened to be theists implemented the sort of thinking that led to the principles of science we have now.
God, and medieval theologians laid the groundwork for modern science by saying the world was governed by an intelligent creator. That means we can understand the world with our intelligence.
Yeah, see, that's an assertion that people were like, oh, there's a God, and he must have made the world intelligible. He gave us a brain to sort it out, and so we're going to go see if we can sort it out. And yet they faced, problems with the church when they came up with answers that the church didn't like.
And studying God led to studying the world because the world is God's creation.
Studying God didn't lead to studying the world. Those two things can happen simultaneously. Your reason for studying the world is because you want to understand the world, and you can begin with the world's going to make sense because God created it so that it can be sensible. That premise may in fact be false, and yet you could still be exploring the world with the thought that God created it.
It is just used to fill in the gaps of things that science can't explain yet. Well, actually, God is the reason for everything, even things that science can explain.
Okay, so the God of the gaps argument, it would be a mistake to say God is just used to fill in the gaps that science can't explain yet, but it would not be wrong to say that the God concepts are frequently used to fill in the gaps of things that science can't explain. If you're going to respond to that by saying that God is the reason for everything, even if science can't explain it, you still have all of your work to do, because that is just a bald assertion that not only doesn't answer this objection, which isn't an argument for atheism, it doesn't do anything to explain or edify your position on this, other than you assert that God is the reason for everything. Okay, prove it and use science, because, oh, wait, you can't use science because God's outside. Okay, then what can you use? Once again, we're back to near the beginning, where you need to demonstrate what method and mechanism and what its reliability is, and how we can test your method can be used to show that God exists and is the reason for everything.
It's not one or the other. It's not like everything's explained by either science or God, and the more science can explain, the less God can explain. Really, science can explain almost everything, but God is still behind it all.
Okay, so this is a completely dishonest response to this. When we're talking about God of the gaps, we're saying, here's things we understand with science and have good understanding of. Whether or not God caused them is completely irrelevant. Science doesn't say God didn't cause them. Whether or not God caused them is irrelevant. What we're saying is these are things that we have scientific, naturalistic understandings for. Whether or not God tinkered with it or whatever else, you can't prove. So saying God's behind all of it is irrelevant. What this is objecting to is, here's something we don't have a naturalistic explanation for, and it is the tendency of theists to stick a God in that gap and pretend that they've explained something when they've explained nothing, because the God concept has no explanatory power. We tend to explain things in terms of other things that we understand. This is how science works. We begin at the bottom and build up more and more explanations, not a top-down explanation of God did it. And so when you say God is the explanation for everything, you have explained nothing. You've offered up a panacea assertion that does not do anything and doesn't address this objection, which is a legitimate objection. If people are sticking God into the gaps of our knowledge, which is what's happened consistently, as we learn every gap that we've ever filled in the history of humanity with a naturalistic explanation, everything that we've ever learned that used to be attributed to a supernatural explanation of a God was wrong, or was unable to be demonstrated, and no room left for that supernatural explanation. Every time, to paraphrase Tim Minchin, it's been determined to be not magic.
Because science explains the how, and God explains the why.
No, that's an absolute nonsense. How questions and why questions are just the same with different phrasing. All we want to do is understand, how does this happen? And why is just a way to deflect from that by suggesting, God has a reason, and may use this mechanism. But we don't care about God's reason because we don't even know that there's a God who has a reason. I don't care why God created life in broad diversity. But if he did it by using the genetics of DNA. And that's what the science explains. You're asserting that on top of the genetics of DNA, God had some reason to do it. Well, cool. Let's go to the Bible and say, let God be true and every man a liar, and just say, you're lying. And when God tells me what his reason was, I'll consider it and see if I value it at all.
If God is good, why can't he destroy all evil? Well, he eventually will. Why can't he do it now? Because he'd have to destroy you. Why does God let any bad things happen? Because we deserve it. Well, animals don't sin, so why do they suffer? Well, the Bible says all things will...
Okay, so this is a little quick parade, so we'll do this right here. None of these are arguments against the existence of God. These are just people objecting to apparent inconsistencies within particular theistic doctrines. First of all, there may be a God that is evil or that is in favor of evil. These are objections to the notion that there is a God that is real and is opposed to evil, but hasn't eliminated it. So why hasn't God eliminated it? Well, he will eventually. Yeah, but why hasn't he done it yet? Well, he will eventually. Yeah, but why hasn't he done it yet? You didn't answer. He just will. You didn't say why. If God's about the why questions, like you claim, why aren't you giving the answers of why God hasn't done it? Oh, is it because you don't know? Is it because nobody knows? Is it because God hasn't seen fit to give any explanation for that? Then people's question and objection as to why whence cometh evil is still reasonable. Now, another potential apologetic is that God isn't all good, despite what people say, or that this is the best of all possible worlds, and you don't know how much worse it would be if God wasn't acting in some way to minimize the evil. None of these are arguments
will be restored. So if God is good, we can assume that they will be compensated. How do you know that God isn't evil instead? Well, because evil is not a thing the way...
Okay, this might be the dumbest response to this ever. How do you know that God isn't evil? Because evil isn't a substance. Nothing in the question suggested that evil was a substance. The question was, how do you know that God's character isn't accurately described as evil? That's what the question means. This evil isn't a substance is dumb.
Good is. Just like cold is just a lack of heat, and dark is just a lack of light, evil is just a lack of good.
How do you know that God doesn't lack good?
And for good to be objective, it needs to come from God. So a God who is objectively evil...
So you have a response that is entirely circular. When I say, how do you know that God doesn't lack good? Then your thing is, by definition, all good is in accordance with God's nature. So how do you know that God isn't evil? Because we've defined him that way.
Evil is logically impossible. Can God make a...
The fact that he's going to utter the phrase logically impossible after such an absolute bullshit dismissal of that is funny. Can God make a rock he can't lift? Can God make a burrito so hot that he can't eat it? And another one of my favorites. None of these are arguments against the existence of any God. They're the arguments against the existence of God that specifically has powers. And here's the thing. Even if you're talking about the Bible doesn't say that God is all-powerful, just that God can do all things that are possible. And so modern theologians have this notion that it's not that God is omnipotent in a simple sense. God is all-powerful in that God possesses the capability to do all things that can be done. And so if something is logically impossible, then God can't do it, and nobody should be asserting that he can. And I suspect if this guy is even close to worth listening to further, that's what he'll say. And this isn't an argument against God. It is an objection to a naive, simple version of God that most theologians have moved past.
A rock he can't lift? Well, you're just asking if God can contradict himself, like, can God lie?
Not can God contradict himself. Can God do something that is logically contradictory? You're there. You've reframed this so that you basically have defined God as the foundation of logic. Ooh, are we going to get to that in a minute?
Or can God change? Or can God make another God? And the answer to all those things is no. God being all-powerful means he can do anything to things outside himself. It doesn't mean that he can do anything to himself or that he can contradict himself. Why did God let evil exist at all? So he could be glorified in defeating it.
So he can show off. That's it. So he can show off. I could just have a good world with good people. I could just make everybody here in heaven. I could just skip right to the last page. But you know what? I got a lot of power. I kind of like to show off. So let's make things really terrible. It's like getting hired at a new job. And let's say you get hired at a Dairy Queen. And right off the bat, you just go over and yank the nozzle off the ice cream machine to let ice cream flow all over the place so that you can be the guy who found the fault and cleaned it up. The very notion that God's doing this all to show off, that doesn't seem like a very good God to me. Not an argument against the existence of God, but none of these are.
Triumph over evil is a greater good than evil having just never existed. Religion is just wishful thinking. Well, if that were true, then the Bible wouldn't be all about how much we all suck.
Oh, the Bible isn't all about everything, how much you suck. But that's not an argument. That's not even a reply. First of all, religion is just wishful thinking, is an assertion that isn't demonstrated, even though a good number of things about a good number of religions would be viewed as wishful thinking, including by religious people, especially if they're viewing the wishful thinking of people who are in other religions. It doesn't disprove God, but it's a real issue. But if you're saying religion is just wishful thinking, first of all, responding with the Bible wouldn't be about how much we suck means you're not addressing religion, you're addressing Christianity and Judaism, perhaps based on the Bible. But the Bible isn't just about how much we suck. It is basically a psychological trick to make you think you suck and need God. See, people say religions poison you and then offer you the antidote, except that's not what they do. Religions convince you that you're poisoned when you're not, and then they offer you the homeopathic remedy, because now you can never demonstrate that the homeopathic remedy doesn't work because you were never sick or broken in the first place. But your response has nothing to do with whether or not religion is wishful thinking. That was bizarre.
Psychology explains why you believe in God.
Psychology certainly offers explanations, or at least models, that would explain why many people believe in many different things that aren't true, including many gods, including all of the gods that this individual think aren't true. So this is closer to an argument against God by asserting that all of the various religions can be understood in a psychological framework of our desire to not be alone and to build community and to think we're special and to have the confidence of someone out there cares about me and has certainty about all of the things that I'm uncertain. All of those psychological things that every religion, yes, including yours, Redeem Zoomer, exploit in people would be a sufficient explanation for God belief. It would be a sufficient explanation for how we get things wrong. It does not demonstrate that the God isn't real or that the religion is false, but it would in fact be sufficient to explain the God that you propose. Your fears, your confusion, your discomfort with not knowing the answer, all of that is thwarted by appealing to a God that loves you and knows all the answers and will take care. Why is there evil? Don't worry, God will take care of it later. Everything about this, there's a psychological structure that is consistent with your belief in God. What do you got to say?
So what? If God is real, we should expect there to be some psychological or social benefit to believing it.
Wow. This one's so strong that he just acknowledges it and says, psychology explains why you believe in God. And he's basically saying, yes, it doesn't so much explain why you believe in God, but it's consistent with it, which would be the case if God is real too. Yeah, but the question is God real? That's the question. That's the foundation of what we're looking at potentially with atheism. And so if the question is God real, saying, well, there'd be psychological benefits to God being real. I mean, you could try and turn this around and make this an argument for the existence of God. Here's my argument. Premise 1, if God exists, there would be psychological benefits to believing in him. Premise 2, there are psychological benefits to believing in him. Therefore, God exists. The problem is that that's not the way this works at all.
In him. Spiritual experiences can be explained by brain chemicals.
Yes, this is essentially similar to the last one in the sense that there are psychological reasons that would justify most things about religious belief, and some of the things that get identified as spiritual experiences, which I still don't know what the word spiritual means. It seems to mean so many different things to so many different people, can be explained by brain chemicals. Yes, your brain chemistry can be used to explain everything about how you experience the world, but you can do it with both naturally occurring chemicals, electrochemical states in your brain, dopamine rush, things like that, but also through psychedelics and other things. Those can give people spiritual experiences or things that are described as spiritual experiences. The issue here is, where's the demonstration that these experiences are actually non-material, that they tie to something that isn't the material world, that isn't merely chemicals? You have to show that it's more.
Well, romantic experiences can also be explained by brain chemicals, but that doesn't mean your wife isn't real.
Correct. Yes. Congratulations. It's not an argument that it isn't real, but it is yet another piece in a puzzle that suggests we have loads of ways to show that there's no need and no justification to appeal to the supernatural, that the natural is enough. But to simply say, oh, well, romantic experiences can be explained by brain chemicals, that doesn't mean your wife isn't real. Correct. But it also doesn't mean she is real. I've seen people who think they're in a relationship with someone who does not exist. How do you demonstrate that that person exists? You would never suggest, oh, well, I've had romantic experiences with this person. And somebody says, well, that could just be brain chemicals. How do you know that person's real? When they say, how do you know that person's real? You go down a different road to demonstrate that God's real. So, this barely counts as a response.
Real. So spiritual experiences being explained by brain chemicals doesn't mean that God isn't real.
Correct.
Well,
it doesn't mean that God isn't real.
Drug trips show that spiritual experiences are from the brain. Well, people who have had both drug trips and near-death experiences say that they're completely different categories.
You know what the cool thing is about near-death experiences? They're not death experiences. And generally, people see the religious iconography that they were raised or grew up around or something like that. And in every situation, not a single near-death experience has ever been concluded and demonstrated to be an actual experience of some other world. See, when a brain is dying or when it's on drugs, there can be similar yet different experiences. Just like you can be standing in church and singing and feel euphoric and feel like you're high without taking drugs. And you can do the same thing at a secular concert, and you can do the same thing at an art museum or a botanical garden. How we are affected by the world around us, including drugs, can be similar qualities of experience, even though they're not identical. So it doesn't surprise me at all to hear somebody whose oxygen-deprived brain was in a state near death, who is then resuscitated or regains consciousness. Which makes more sense, that an unidentifiable and almost certainly false spirit left their body and had an experience that it's bringing back and feeding to their brain after the fact, or that a brain deprived of oxygen in a near-death state has to, when it comes back to consciousness, says, hey, that's weird, what happened to me, and makes something up. Considering our brains make up everything, and just some of it is more consistent with reality than others, I know what my money's on. True, doesn't disprove God, but you saying people have had NDEs that say they're different from drug trips. Yeah. A chemically altered brain and an oxygen deprived brain are both unlikely testifiers to truth. I don't trust the people who say, I had this experience on drugs, therefore it's real. I had this experience meditating, therefore it's real. I had this experience praying, therefore it's real. I had this experience while near death, therefore it's real. No, I prefer to trust the more reliable, more normatively functioning brain than any of those.
Categories of feeling. The story of Jesus was copied from the story of Horus, or
Just stop saying it. The dying and rising gods, and this is something that gets tied to mythicism and all this other stuff. Are there aspects of stories that are similar? Yeah, but there's also something called convergent evolution, and so you can have convergent stories. If you're going to assert that the story of Jesus was copied from Horus, you can't just say, oh, there are similarities, and then exaggerate some of those similarities, which does happen. This is just a bad argument. Now, are there similarities that perhaps need to be explained? Yes, but when you say the story of Jesus was merely copied from Horus, don't say that.
or some other ancient character.
Correct.
Okay, dude, that's a Reddit atheist level myth. Even atheist scholars know that that's silly. Faith?
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't spend any time on Reddit, so I don't know how much of an insult that is
the opposite of logic and reason. No, it's not. Faith just means trust.
No, it doesn't. So here's the thing. There are multiple connotations of faith, and one of those connotations is trust. However, if you have a reasonable trust based on evidence, and somebody says, why do you trust that? You don't say it's a matter of faith. You say, I have evidence. Faith in religious sense isn't merely confidence in the absence of certainty. It is the excuse people give for believing something when they don't have a good reason. If you have a good reason and somebody says, why do you believe this? At no point would you ever think to utter, it's just faith. And then say, what? No, I have faith in the evidence. That is absolute bullshit. If you have confidence in the face of an absence of certainty, we all do. I don't think you can be certain about anything at all. But when you say, why do you believe this? And somebody says, it's a matter of faith, that is an admission that they don't have evidence. And so faith doesn't merely mean trust. One of the correct and normative usages of faith is trust. But what a lot of theists will do is take my trust that this chair will hold me, which is confidence based on evidence that can be tested, and say that I have faith in this chair just like they have faith in Jesus, which is an absolute lie. I have confidence in this chair because of evidence that can be tested and objectively verified by anybody. That is not the same usage of faith that you're using when you say, I have faith in Jesus. And it's incredibly dishonest to suggest so. It's an equivocation fallacy.
Anytime you eat food, you're having faith that it's not poison.
No, I'm not. I have confidence based in what I know about food, what I know about government regulations, what I know about where I'm eating. And my confidence is proportional to evidence. That's what skepticism is about. That's a la David Hume, the wise man proportions his confidence to the evidence. I don't merely run around to restaurants having faith. This is the lie of pretending that faith is confidence in the absence of certainty, because we always have some confidence in the absolute absence of certainty because we can't have certainty. But to suggest my trust of food processes, food preparation processes at a place that is regulated and inspected down the street is on the same grounds as your faith in Jesus is a lie.
And even if you can't scientifically prove it. If you're married, you have faith that your wife loves you, even if you can't scientifically prove that.
No, I don't. I don't have faith that my wife or partner loves me. I have a reasonable confidence based on evidence of what they do. Love is a sort of thing that is occasionally difficult to identify, but it means a lot of different things. There's different types of love. I love my partner. I love my mom. I love my brother. I love people. But the notion that you just have to rely on faith. No, we can tell when someone loves us. Now, could they be lying? Yes, because I don't have absolute any way to confirm. I can't read your mind. So once again, this is another example of confidence in the absence of certainty. But we're so good at recognizing a lack of love that we can spot externally postpartum depression in mothers that are not acting in a way that is consistent with loving them. What you may not be able to tell is when someone is acting as if they love you when they don't. And we're all stuck there. So my confidence that someone loves me is proportional to the evidence that they demonstrate they do. Can I be wrong? Absolutely. I would never assert that I couldn't be wrong about that. Is that just the same as your confidence that Jesus loves you? Not even close. That's like saying you have a girlfriend who loves you who goes to another school.
And if you tried to scientifically prove it, she'd probably get very mad at you because it would mean you didn't trust her.
Well, whether or not she gets mad is irrelevant. And why are we assuming that it's a she?
Evolution proves God didn't create the world. Well, not necessarily. God often works through natural processes in the Bible, and for all of church history, there have been prominent Christian theologians who have had a more metaphorical interpretation of Genesis, even well over 1,000 years before Darwin existed.
So evolution doesn't disprove God. Once again, there's been almost no arguments that are arguments actually for atheism, but it says arguments atheist arguments. So maybe he's just saying, these are things I've heard atheists say. Cool. Evolution doesn't disprove God. But what it does is it doesn't have any need for a God. Evolution, by means of natural selection, has a mechanism that is, chemistry doesn't disprove God, but God's not necessary for any chemical interaction that we can tell. And to propose that there's a God involved, even in a metaphorical sense, is to misunderstand the nature of science. Oh, God came in and tinkered. No, evolution doesn't. We have zero evidence of a God coming in and tinkering. I mean, you can keep claiming that God did it metaphorically and made use of science, but all that does is put God in the position of constructing a world that intentionally looks like he wasn't involved in its creation.
Christianity only spread because of military conquest.
That's not true.
Well, eventually they did do military conquest, but for the first 300 years of Christianity, it was illegal, and it took over the Roman Empire despite that because of how popular it became.
Yeah, it became popular in part, not just through military conquest, but by convincing leaders like Constantine. However, the nature of how compelling it is and to what extent it was adopted is irrelevant to how true it is.
Constantine invented what we now know of as Christianity. Again, Reddit atheist level myth. Atheists can do better than that. Listen to an actual scholar.
Yeah, I wouldn't have said Constantine invented modern Christianity. I don't know if I'd call it a Reddit myth. There are certainly aspects that are best attributed to Constantine, but no, this is like some mythicist level stuff that perhaps oversimplifies. So whether it's a Reddit myth, I don't know.
If Christianity is true, why are there so many denominations of it?
Finally, after 8.5 minutes, getting down to the last 30 seconds of this video, the question of why are there so many different Christian denominations? This is a single sentence argument from inconsistent revelation. Why is it the case that there's no way to tell which of these Christian denominations are correct if they disagree on things? This is legitimately an argument against Christianity as a revealed religion. It's not an argument so much for atheism when you include Christian. That's the problem here is, why are there so many religions instead of why are there so many Christian denominations? Now that's an argument from inconsistent revelation that goes beyond Christianity to suggest, hey, where are these other religions from as well? But what's he going to say? Why are there so many Christian denominations if there is a God that reveals himself to people?
Of it. Well, yeah, there are a lot of denominations, but the things they agree on are a lot more significant than the things they disagree on.
The things that unite us are greater than the things that divide us, as long as we're both on the same side against somebody else. But that's not an answer to the question. The answer to the question is, why are there differences at all? You didn't even answer that. The lazy apologist answer, I thought, would be because humans are going to get some things wrong. But you didn't even really do that. You kind of implied that, hey, they agree on the important stuff, they agree on the non-important stuff. What stuff is non-important? Do they disagree on whether some things are sin or not? Because I know some really gay-friendly churches and some really anti-gay churches, and that seems to me to be an important thing. Throughout the history of Christianity, what counted as Christianity has changed. What Christianity looked like predominantly 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 700 years ago, 900 years ago is different than what it is today. What churches taught in the 19th century and the 20th century is a little bit different than you're seeing from some others today. Are you telling me none of these differences are important enough for you to have an explanation for? And even if they weren't, aren't they stumbling blocks to Christians? And shouldn't a God that wants a confirmation of what he actually thinks have the responsibility of correcting those things?
There's no evidence for Jesus outside the Bible. Well, that's not true. There's the ancient Jewish historian.
Okay, so when you dishonestly phrase this as no evidence for Jesus outside the Bible, the issue here is there is no contemporary extra biblical account that we have any way to confirm. Josephus, not a contemporary. It's like saying there is no evidence for Elvis. Okay, well, my sister just swore she saw Elvis just the other day, and she was born 10 years ago. Okay, she's not a contemporary to Elvis, and she's not going to be. Plus, Josephus didn't say that there was a Jesus. Josephus talked about Christians, and nobody's denying that Christians exist or existed.
Josephus, who wrote about Jesus, and he's one of the reasons why even secular scholars know Jesus.
Yeah. Now, about this time, there was Jesus, a wise man, if it be call him a wise man. Now, this is also a disputed passage, particularly because it says he was the Christ. But what Josephus is doing is not saying, I can attest to the fact that there was someone named Jesus who was a wise man, who was the Christ. He's saying around this time, people are reporting that there was Jesus, a wise man, and whether or not he said he was the Christ, and this is disputed by scholars. However, Josephus, not being a contemporary, can't confirm the existence of Jesus. He can just confirm that there were people who believed that there was a Jesus, which I don't think is in dispute.
Historically existed. You really think God made billions of galaxies with billions of stars in each of them just to have a personal relationship with you?
This is also not an argument for atheism. It's not an argument against God. It is basically the argument from space that it seems bizarre that billions upon billions of galaxies with billions of stars and billions upon billions of planets, and everything about God's intention happens on a small, within a few miles of a very particular section of the surface part of this planet. It is essentially, is God basically like Wile E. Coyote, is God intentionally making things vastly more complicated than they would ever need to be? Doesn't this suggest, for example, that the more naturalistic explanation is preferred, that the universe doesn't care about you and there's no reason to think it does?
Yes.
Cool. So your response is yes. When somebody raises an issue to say, hey, this seems preposterous, it's like saying, in order for me to reach down and pick up these glasses, I actually walked downstairs, went to the garage, cleaned out part of an area, got my chop saw out, pulled some wood down from the shelf, and then chopped up a piece of wood into an appropriate length, then grabbed that wood, took it to my friend's house where he's got a lathe, put it on the lathe, and laid out a handle on it, then got a welding machine, and chopped an old fork in half and took the forked thing off of it, bent the tines up, put that onto the wooden handle, and then came back in and found a friend down the street who I gave this thing to in order to have them come over and reach down and lift up the glasses with the newly divine thing and hand it to them. Now, that is almost, I don't want to use infinity as a quantity, but that is vastly less complicated than the universe, and yet we would consider it absurd to go through all of that for this. It's absurd. Now, that doesn't disprove God. It's not an argument for atheism. Nothing about what you said confirmed atheism. All it confirmed is that you believe something that we think is absurd. And you could be correct. I can't show that you're not correct, but the burden of proof is on you to show that you are correct. And putting up a 10-minute video or less than 10-minute video, listing things you've heard atheists say and offering zero evidence and zero argument for what you actually believe, zero defense of the things that people are objecting to, that's worth zero more of my time. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.